I just knew the old film, The Man Who Never Was, which is a very different entity, made in a different era. But I was gripped. I was gripped by this idea of a fictional character being created, and this sense of just this, watching a non-existent man become real somehow. And I suppose in a way that's what storytelling does. That's what fiction always does. And here we are with a thing that sounds like fiction, which is about the creation of a fiction, of a fictional character who has a very, very real impact on world events.
So the first thing that I was actually also speaking with the cast, we were thinking about how much is hard nowadays to wait. And what the protagonists of this movie had to do at the end was just waiting in a room and see, they didn't have cell phone, they didn't have even telephone to know if their plan worked. So don't you think that in a certain way it's cathartic to see this movie nowadays? That we have all this connection that is all frenetics.
I think
we have
that
to
is
wait.
so true. It's so much about the passage of time story. And as I think I probably discussed with you when we were in Malaga, that there's a sort of inflection point 2/3 of the way through the movie when the meticulous construction of this fiction is at its kind of apotheosis. The body is launched. And at that moment, the people who've created the fiction have absolutely no control over it whatsoever. And from that moment onwards, they're plunged into a kind of hell, a kind of a hell of unknowing, of suspicion, of doubt, and the absence of any certainty. And I think that that's something that interestingly, because it was the sort of potential fault line. How do you dramatize the last third of the story when you don't, you can't go into Hitler's bunker and so forth? And we realized that there was a way of telling it by inverting that and actually dramatizing the story in terms of that ignorance and that having to endure the unknowing moment by moment and hour by hour, which is one of the reasons why you get to the end of the story, the central characters are completely hollowed out. They have no ability to feel empowered or pleased or responsible in any way for what actually unfolds because they've lost themselves in a fiction. And so, yeah, I think it's a very interesting experience now.
You're right in that war movies are so often the action of the war, the taking or losing of territory. And they less often do they devote themselves to the thinking behind it, and particularly the information and disinformation and strategy required. Because in the end, before those troops get sent anywhere and before attacks get devised, there's a human being somewhere that looks at whatever information they have and makes a decision about how to play that strategy out. And the manipulation of people's expectations and their decisions is almost more important than how they're then executed. So this was a very refreshing look. I don't know if their life was continuing as normal, but certainly it was a different part. It's not their bravado or the machismo or their ability to fire straight. It's their ability to think creatively that is on display here.
But the female perspective was it was a strong one, and it was really nice to get to show these women who had just as much to contribute to these ideas in MI5 as the men.
I think they were all over the place. It's just that they were never seen, and that particularly, as you say, and particularly in this case, because they were so secret, and their ideas and the ideas that they were sharing with one another had to be kept top secret, so that there would be an element of surprise when they pulled this enormous stunt on the Germans. So, but it was very satisfying that at last you see women actually participating on the same level as men, and not just writing notes and getting tea.